Amy was born in Minneapolis, but spent much of her gardening life in the Cincinnati area, where she worked at a wholesale nursery for 16 years. In 2013, she arrived in Oregon and is the co-author of Gardening in the Pacific Northwest, The Complete Homeowner's Guide, along with Paul Bonine. She is currently working at Garden Fever in Northeast Portland, as well as writing and speaking about gardening for insects and other wildlife. She's pretty passionate about helping others make their garden more biodiverse, and for that, we really thank her. Today, she's going to tell us about 8 simple steps we can employ to create a more insect-friendly habitat in our garden. So welcome, Amy. I'm going to turn the program over to you.
All right, thanks. Is my audio okay? Let me see.
I can hear you just fine.
Okay, I think we're good to go. All right, I'm going to get started because I have a lot to talk about. Once upon a time, when you took a road trip, the first thing you do when you got home was wash the car. The entire front of the car would be covered in bugs. Those days are over. Insects are disappearing. One famous study states that in 40 years' time, invertebrate populations fell by 45% worldwide. We need insects. Insects pollinate around 80% of the world's flowering plants, including many of our food crops. Insects themselves serve as food for countless other creatures. Insects help break down waste, recycle nutrients, and enrich the soil. As the great entomologist E.O. Wilson once said, if all mankind were to disappear, the world would regenerate back to the rich state of equilibrium that existed 10,000 years ago. If insects were to vanish, the environment would collapse into chaos. Now, the causes of insect declines are many: pesticides, pollution, climate change, invasive species. But perhaps the biggest factor is habitat loss in the form of agriculture, deforestation, and urbanization. Now, habitat loss is something that most individuals can't do much about, and it all seems pretty overwhelming. But there is one habitat you can control if you're fortunate enough to own a little piece of property, and that's your garden. And I'm here to tell you, it doesn't have to be a large garden, and it doesn't have to take a lot of time to see meaningful results. Since 2021, I've been turning my small urban garden in Northeast Portland into a garden for insects and other wildlife. And over that time, I have been blown away by the diversity of insects I've found. I've observed about 370 species so far, and the number keeps growing every year. So today I want to share with you 8 things you can do in your own garden to help support our valuable insects. And you'll meet some of the fascinating creatures that show up when you welcome them in. All right, number 1, provide keystone plants for caterpillars. In 1969, a researcher in California studied Wilson's warblers. He sat by their nests and he counted how many times per day the parents fed their chicks, primarily with caterpillars. The average was 812 times per day. Caterpillars are immensely important to birds and to food webs in general, and we can support these food webs in our gardens by planting the plants that feed caterpillars. So, what plants do caterpillars eat? Well, most of them are pretty picky eaters. Around 2/3 of caterpillars only eat plants from one family, and almost half of caterpillars only eat plants from a single genus. So, does that mean we have to plant hundreds of different plants to feed all the different caterpillar species? Well, no, because some plants are much better at feeding a wide variety of caterpillars than others. In fact, only 14% of the native plants in an area serve as host plants for 90% of the moths and butterflies, the caterpillars that live there. Doug Tallamy calls these plants keystone plants in his inspiring book, Nature's Best Hope. So here in the Pacific Northwest, our number 1 keystone plant is salix, our native willows. They support 312 species of caterpillars here, such as the western tiger swallowtail butterfly and the polyphemus moth. Now, I chose a schooler willow for my garden, and I couldn't be happier with it. Here it is in 2021. I planted it from a 1-gallon pot, and here it is 3 years later, 15 feet tall. This is the fastest growing thing I've ever planted. Now here's one that's a little older. This is at Wildlife Botanical Gardens in Brush Prairie, Washington. A schooler willow should get around 30 feet tall or even taller, but it's a very upright grower. It's almost columnar, so it has a small footprint, and I think it's a great tree for small gardens. Plus, schooler willow does not need a lot of water like most other willows. It's a very, very easy, undemanding tree, and it is so beneficial for wildlife. The number 2 keystone plant in our area is prunus, our native cherries. They support 240 species of caterpillars here, such as the Lorcan's admiral butterfly and the blinded sphinx moth. Now, I chose a chokecherry for my garden, and I love it. This is a moderate grower, should get around 20 to 30 feet tall. So again, it's a nice size for small gardens. Now, my chokecherry bloomed for the first time this year, last month, and I also found out it's a fantastic pollinator plant. Now, by the way, there is a purple-leaved version of this tree. It's got 2 names, Canada Red and Schubert chokecherry, and I don't recommend it because red-leaved versions of plants have been found to be much less attractive to the caterpillars we want to support. The number 3 keystone plant in our area is populus, our native aspens and cottonwoods. They support 227 species of caterpillars here, such as the morning cloak butterfly and the western-eyed sphinx moth. Now, a few years ago, I did plant a small quaking aspen in my garden, but one night the raccoons climbed it and they broke it in half, and I decided to replace it with our number 4 keystone plant, Alnus, our native alders. Now, alders support 210 species of caterpillars here, such as the pale swallowtail butterfly and the Ceanothus silk moth. Now, you're probably familiar with red alder. It's a common tree here in the Northwest, especially in wet areas. But for my garden, I chose a white alder, Alnus rhombifolia, because it's supposed to stay smaller than red alder and it doesn't need as much water. Now, I've been very happy with my white alder so far. It's been a fast grower, should get around 30 feet tall or even taller, we'll see. The leaves every year are lush and healthy looking, unfortunately, because I'm hoping that someday soon they'll be all chewed up by caterpillars. Number 2, don't spray your aphids. Aphids are kind of amazing. Now, hear me out. Did you know there are at least 760 species of aphid in the Pacific Northwest? They come in many different colors: gold, black, green, cream, red. Some of them specialize on certain plants, such as lupins, honeysuckles, cabbage family plants. And one year, I even found a species of aphid that specializes on water lily pads. Some other aphid trivia. Aphids can give birth to live young. They don't just lay eggs. Aphids can reproduce without mating. They basically clone themselves. And the babies are born pregnant. That's how they reproduce so fast. But the really incredible thing about aphids is how valuable they are as food for so many other creatures. I had no idea how important they were until I started to pay attention. Now, we're all familiar with ladybugs and their appetite for aphids. I've seen 8 species of ladybug in my garden that eat aphids. It's the larvae that do most of the eating, and they look like little alligators. But ladybugs are just the tip of the iceberg. For instance, there's hoverflies. I've seen 16 species of hoverfly in my garden that eat aphids. Some of these hoverflies do a pretty good impersonation of a yellow jacket, like the black-margined flower fly and the western aphid eater. Some of them have black and white patterns, like the white-bowed smoothwing. Some of them are teeny tiny, but they're really beautiful when you can see them up close, like the forked globetail and the western calligrapher. Now, the adult hoverflies visit flowers. It's the larvae of the flies that actually eat the aphids, and they may look like slugs, albeit pretty slugs, or they may look more like caterpillars. Now, this is another kind of fly. This is a long-legged fly, and with these, it's the adults that eat the aphids. I think these are just gorgeous little flies. I saw these for the first time in my garden last year. Lacewings eat aphids. I know the adults eat aphids because I caught this one eating aphids on my pea plants one day. But the larvae of the lacewings eat even more aphids, and they're known as aphid lions because they're such fierce predators. This is a lacewing egg. It's laid on a long stalk, and that's to keep the babies separated so that when they hatch, they don't eat each other. Soldier beetles eat an incredible amount of aphids. I have a little cascara tree that got infested with aphids last year, and the soldier beetles went to war on them and they completely wiped them out. Damselflies eat aphids. These are dragonfly relatives that look like colorful needles floating around in the garden. You can watch them hovering around your plants, just picking off little insects. There are wasps that lay their eggs inside of aphids, and the larvae develop inside, eventually killing the aphid. Now, by the time the wasp emerges, the aphid's body has become dry and tan and inflated, kind of like a little Rice Krispie. And at that point, it's called an aphid mummy. You can find these mummies on your plants if you look for them. There are also wasps that grab aphids and carry them back to their nest in a hollow stem somewhere, and they lay their eggs on them there. Now, last summer, I sat by one of my lupins and I watched one of these wasps hunting. I don't know what species it was, but she was in the group of wasps called the square-headed wasps for obvious reasons. So I watched her come back again and again, carrying off one aphid at a time. And within a couple of days, she had picked off every one. Honestly, I look forward to aphid infestations now because I can't wait to see who's going to come to the rescue. In all, I've seen 39 species of insect in my garden that prey on aphids, and I'm sure there are many more, so I never spray my aphids. Number 3, provide pollen plants. So pollen is easy to provide in a garden, right? You just need to plant lots of flowers. Well, planting lots of flowers is a good start, but there's more to it than that, and we can do much better by planting the right kinds of flowers. First of all, what is pollen? To an insect, pollen is protein. Pollen contains anywhere from 2 to 62% protein. And to put that in perspective, sirloin steak is 26% protein. So here's a few examples. Dandelion pollen is 19% protein. Steak, again, is 26%. Annual sunflowers, 31%. Woods rose, 45%. And tomato pollen is 55% protein. So what insects eat pollen? Well, some beetles eat pollen. Some flies eat pollen. There's a small group of wasps that feed pollen to their offspring, the pollen wasps. But mostly when we think of pollen, we think of bees. So adult female bees will eat some pollen, and they need that protein to help complete the development of their reproductive system. Adult male bees will occasionally eat a little pollen too, but primarily pollen is food for baby bees. And this is a baby bee eating the pollen ball its mother has collected for it. Now you can watch bees collecting pollen in your garden. Only female bees collect pollen, and usually it's the mothers that collect pollen for their offspring. But among bumblebees, the sisters of the baby bees will also collect pollen, and they're known as workers. Bees have different methods for gathering pollen. Often they'll scurry really fast over the surface of the flowers, and this is called scrabbling. Tiny bees may curl their whole body around a single anther to collect the pollen. Bumblebees and some other bees will buzz pollinate certain flowers. Buzz pollination is when the bee grabs onto the flower parts and she vibrates her flight muscles, and that shakes the pollen loose from the anthers. It makes a high-pitched buzzing sound when she does this. It sounds like zzz, zzz. And in my garden, I've seen and heard bumblebees buzz pollinating many different plants, such as blueberries, California lilac, California poppies, comfrey, honeywort, Cerinthe major. This is an annual that's native to the Mediterranean, and the bumblebees really love this one. Manzanita. This is an important pollen and nectar source in my garden early in the year. Penstemons. Penstemons are interesting because I've noticed when a bumblebee wants pollen from the flower, she'll go in upside down because the pollen's on the ceiling of the flower and she'll buzz it. But if she just wants nectar, she'll just go in right side up and she won't buzz. My Nootka rose and some other roses are buzz pollinated. Shrubby cinquefoil. This is a small shrub that's native to the Northwest. It's sometimes buzz pollinated. Our native thimbleberry is buzz pollinated, and tomatoes are buzz pollinated. Now, once they've collected the pollen, bees have different methods of carrying it back to the nest. Bumblebees and honeybees have special pollen baskets on their back legs for carrying pollen, and they'll often mix some nectar in with that pollen to make it sticky into a ball they can carry. Most other bees have long hairs on their back legs for carrying pollen, such as mining bees, small carpenter bees, sweat bees, and longhorn bees. Now, bees in the leafcutter family carry pollen on their bellies, such as this leafcutter bee. You can see the orange hairs on her belly for carrying pollen. Mason bees are also in this family. This is a little mason bee that made a nest in the handles of my loppers last year. So I'm not allowed to use my loppers until they emerge. You can see the white pollen she's carrying on her belly there for her babies. And wool carder bees, these are mostly European bees that have invaded North America, but you can see the orange hairs she has on her belly for carrying pollen. Now, this is a mast bee. These are very tiny little black bees. They look like flying ants. Now, she doesn't have much hair at all on her body, and that's because she has a different plan. She's going to eat the pollen, and then when she gets back to the nest, she'll regurgitate it back up again for her offspring. Now, in the United States, we have about 4,000 species of bees, and about 30% of those are specialist bees. And that means they only collect pollen from one family of plants, or in some cases, only one genus, or even just one species of plant. Now, most of these plants are in the aster family, such as asters, goldenrod, sunflowers, both perennial and annual types of sunflowers are favored by these specialist bees. And gumweed, Grindelia. Now, gumweed is a native plant here in the Northwest. It's not often planted in gardens, but I think it should be planted a lot more because it's a terrific pollinator plant. And these are a couple of longhorn bees on gumweed, and longhorn bees are the most common specialist bees we'll find in our part of the world, especially in urban gardens. Now, most of the bees in your garden, however, will be generalist bees, and that means they gather pollen from many different plants. Now, even though they're not picky eaters, these generalist bees do have preferences. So, what plants do they prefer? Well, we can look again at that list of buzz-pollinated plants, because remember, when bees buzz pollinate, they're after pollen, not nectar. So these are all pollen sources. Some other plants I've seen bees collecting pollen from in my garden include our native camas, crab apples. Apple trees are also good pollen sources. Lupins, and the pollen on lupins is orange, so it's usually pretty obvious when they're collecting it. Meadow foam, this is an annual that's native to Oregon. It's a great source of pollen and nectar in the spring. It's blooming right now in my garden in mid-May, if you're watching this later. Ocean spray. This is a large native shrub. Doesn't bloom for a long time, but when it does bloom in early summer, it is covered in pollinators. And you can see the white pollen she's collecting from it there on her back leg. Veraleaf Phacelia, Phacelia heterophylla. This is a native perennial. It's short-lived, but it does reseed pretty reliably, so it acts like a perennial anyway. It's a great pollen and nectar plant in my garden. Mine's just budding up now, getting ready to bloom. Lacy Phacelia. This is an annual from California. It's also a great pollen and nectar plant. Raspberries are good pollen plants. Our native spireas are good pollen plants. And waterleaf is a good one. This is a native wildflower that does like some shade, which is nice because a lot of these pollinator plants do prefer full sun. And willows. Now, willows are either male or female, and only the males have pollen. So, to reiterate, pollen is essential for baby bees. They need more than just nectar. However, nectar is important too. And nectar is much easier to provide in a garden than pollen. Insects can get it from a lot of different plants, both native and non-native. It really doesn't matter too much. So what is nectar? To an insect, nectar is carbs, it's energy, it's sugar water basically. Most nectar is between 25 and 55% sugar. And to put that in perspective, Coke is only 10% sugar. So what insects drink nectar? Well, moths and butterflies drink nectar, of course. Flies drink nectar, and there are some really cool flies in your garden if you look for them. Wasps drink nectar, and there are some very cool wasps out there. And bees, both male and female, drink nectar for energy. Now, you can watch insects drinking nectar in your garden. And if you look closely, you'll notice they ignore the anthers and they drink from deep at the base of the flower where the nectar is located. Sometimes insects will cheat. They'll cut a hole in the flower to access the nectar directly, and this is called nectar robbing. Now, some plants, such as many of those in the mint family, don't generally have much pollen to offer, but they do have lots of nectar. So you'll see quite an abundance of insects on these plants. Now, these are common garden plants, such as basil, bee balm, calamint, catmint, hummingbird mint, or agastache, lavender, mint, oregano, sage, or salvia, self-heal, and thyme. Now, keep in mind that bees in particular are usually only getting nectar from these plants, not the pollen they need to reproduce. And also, it tends to be mostly honeybees that visit these plants. And honeybees are problematic. They're not native, and they can compete with our native bees for resources. And also, they can spread diseases to our native bees. So personally, in my garden, I consider honeybees to be, well, kind of a nuisance, really. That said, some of these mint family plants do attract more than just honeybees, and I want to point out a few of those. Wild bergamot is a perennial that's native to parts of Idaho and eastward throughout much of the United States. It attracts some interesting bumblebees in my garden. This is a brown-belted bumblebee. I only see it a few times a year in my garden. It's much more common out east, but here in the West, it's much less commonly seen. It's a really big, fuzzy bumblebee. Looks like a big teddy bear, and I just love them. Now, calamint is a perennial. It's a Mediterranean plant with a long, long bloom time in summer and fall. It does attract loads of honeybees, but it also brings in quite a few native bees, such as this small carpenter bee, and it brings in bumblebees. This was a huge bumblebee queen that I saw last year on October 1st. Now, usually by that time of year, the bumblebee queens have long since gone into hibernation, but we had a warm spell last year at that time, and I guess she woke up and she was hungry, and I was glad that I had something to feed her. And this is a black-tailed bumblebee queen that woke up on that same day and visited my calamint. Now, self-heal is a nice native ground cover. It's also in the mint family. I like to use it as a filler all over the garden. It's a great plant. The flowers are especially attractive to bumblebees for nectar. And this is another black-tailed bumblebee. Can you see the bee in this photo? So this is not a bumblebee. This is one of those beautiful green metallic sweat bees. So those are a few mint family plants that attract insects for nectar. Apiaceae is another family of plants that offers primarily nectar to insects. And this family includes plants like fennel, dill, carrots, those umbel type flowers. I just want to point out three of these plants that attract a huge diversity of insects in my garden. Well, the first one is masterwort, Astrantia major. This is a European perennial, and it brings in all kinds of weirdos. This is a gentle, non-aggressive solitary wasp. It's called a carrot wasp because it likes to visit these carrot family flowers. It lays its eggs in the nests of other solitary wasps and bees. Leucospid wasp. This is a funny looking wasp with a big butt that I see regularly on my astrantia when it blooms in early summer. It lays its eggs in the nests of mason bees, which is kind of sad, but that's just nature. This is a female, and you know that because she has an ovipositor. And I don't know if you can see it in this photo, but she has a long ovipositor and it folds over her back when it's not in use and it's held in a sheath. And when she's ready to lay her eggs, that unfurls and she uses it to stab right through wood to get to those mason bee nests. It's pretty amazing. The second plant I want to mention in this family is Eryngium, the sea hollies. Now, there are lots of sea hollies, and most of them are really good nectar plants. But I really like the blue-flowered ones from Europe. They're really pretty, and they attract lots and lots of insects. Now, this one here, Eryngium tripartitum, this is one plant in my garden. And I blew up this photo so I could count all the bumblebees that were on this one plant, and I counted 18 bumblebees. Now, sea hollies attract lots of other insects, such as this great golden digger wasp. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen these wasps. They're really big and they look intimidating, but they're only dangerous if you're a grasshopper, because that's what they feed their offspring. They're not aggressive towards people at all. Now, the third plant I want to mention in this family is shrubby hare's ear, Baplurum fruticosum. This is an evergreen shrub. It's from the Mediterranean. And when it blooms in the summertime, it is covered in insects. I like to pull up a chair and I just watch it like TV. This is my Animal Planet channel. Now, this is another rather scary looking, but it's a very gentle solitary wasp. It's called the elegant grass-carrying wasp. The mothers do carry grass. They take these dried grass blades and they carry them into hollow stems to make their nests. And then they stuff tree crickets and katydids in there to feed their offspring. They just lay their eggs on them. And this is a nest that a grass-carrying wasp made in my garden last year in a bamboo stake. And this is a bizarre little fly on my shrubby hare's ear. It's called the feather-legged fly because it's got these feathery chaps on its back legs. It lays its eggs on stink bugs, which is pretty nice. It helps to keep the stink bug population under control. And then I also want to mention the aster family again. I know I talked about these plants as important pollen sources for specialist bees, but they also offer lots of nectar to all kinds of bees and other insects. So some of the best aster family plants in my garden for nectar are, again, asters, Coreopsis, especially the variety called Zagreb, goldenrod, both our native goldenrod and some of the selections from the eastern states, such as golden baby, which is a really, really good dwarf goldenrod. Gumweed, Grindelia, is a good nectar plant. And pearly everlasting is a good one too. This is a native perennial, comes in both male and female versions, just like willow, and only the males have pollen, but both genders have nectar to offer. And sunflowers, both annual and perennial types of sunflowers are good nectar sources in the garden. All right, number 5, leave some bare ground. So here's an easy way to provide habitat for bees. Just leave some bare ground for them. 70% of our native bees nest in bare ground. Now, most of these are solitary bees, and each mother digs her own nest. And since they don't have a big hive to defend, they're not not territorial. They're not aggressive towards people at all. They're very gentle bees. The average nest is a little less than 14 inches deep. The mother will make individual cells in that nest, and she'll put a little pollen ball in each cell, and then she'll lay a single egg on each pollen ball. Now, most of these bees prefer a sunny site, and they do tend to like loam or sandy loam soil that's fairly compacted. But different bees like different textures. So even if you have clay soil, there are probably some bees that will use that. Case in point, this is at a friend's house. She does have clay soil, but she also has a bunch of these ground nesting bees living there. Doesn't have to be a large area. For example, I have dozens of these small sweat bees nesting in my garden in just a few square feet of space. It's not completely bare, just kind of patchy soil, and they love it. This is at another friend's house. This is a driveway, and it's mostly concrete, but there is this narrow strip of soil running through the whole thing, and there are tons of these little mining bee nests in there. Now, people like to criticize lawns these days, and with good reason, because they are pretty worthless for wildlife. However, if a lawn is very patchy, it can be good habitat for these ground nesting bees. Now, the reason this particular lawn is so patchy is because it's a playground. This is the playground at Sabin Elementary School in Northeast Portland. And there are thousands of ground nesting bees living here. Now, these are very gentle bees. In fact, the kids call them tickle bees because they can handle them and they don't get stung. Now, most of the bees here are mining bees. And here's one that has just come out of her nest. It was a chilly morning and she was still kind of groggy, so she let me hold her for a while. Now, this was in April last year. Most of these mining bees are active in the spring, but there are other ground nesting bees that are active in the spring, summer, and or fall, such as many sweat bees, like the green metallic sweat bees, the small sweat bees that I have nesting in my garden, among others, and furrow bees are also in the sweat bee family. Also, most longhorn bees nest in the ground. These are the specialist bees that use the aster family plants, and they're active in mid to late summer. So, how do you know if you have some of these bees nesting in your garden already? Well, you can look for the nests. Sometimes they'll be mounded up like this, like an anthill, and other times they'll just be flat on the ground, just a little hole in the ground. You can also be on the lookout for bees flying low to the ground. So the males will come out first and they'll often fly low. They're looking for females just coming out of their nest for them to mate with. And then the females will often fly low when they're coming back from a foraging trip and they can't remember exactly where their nest entrance is. It takes them a little while to remember, especially if there's a lot of nests in an area. And then you'll also probably see cuckoo bees in the area. Now, cuckoo bees are parasitic bees that sneak into other bees' nests and lay their own eggs there. Now, these bees often have some red on their body, like this nomad bee, which has a lot of red on its body, and this blood bee. This is another cuckoo bee. So, 70% of bees nest in the ground. What about the other 30%? Well, they nest in stems or crevices above ground, and we can help them out by providing cut stems for them. So this is a small carpenter bee. They like to nest in pithy perennial stems, and in my garden, I've seen them nest in many different plants, such as Agastache, especially this tall one that's native to Southern Oregon. Asters, especially my Douglas aster. Culver's root, Verona castrum. This is a perennial that's native to the eastern United States, but it also does well here. It's a good pollinator plant. Goldenrod, especially the one called Fireworks, is good small carpenter bee habitat. Wild bergamot and other monardas are good for this. Sunflowers, the perennial types that have the strong, sturdy stems that are going to last for a couple of years. and blue vervain. This is a native verbena. It's a good nectar plant, and it's also a good small carpenter bee habitat. So these bees will also use certain woody plants with pithy stems, such as elderberries, hydrangeas, raspberries and other caneberries, roses, and sumac stems. Now, this is important. It's not enough to simply have these plants in your garden. The stems have to be cut so the bees can get in there. They need an access point. There are very few insects that can bore into an intact stem. They usually have to have it cut. And so in nature, they will just wait for that to happen accidentally by an animal or ice and snow or whatever. But you can do this in your garden on purpose and create a lot more habitat. So here's how you do it. When you cut your plants back in late winter, just leave the stems about 12 to 15 inches long. And that way the bees can get in there and they'll have enough room to make their nests in there. So this is how I cut my fireworks goldenrod back in February. And by April, the new growth will almost be covering up those cut stems. And I don't know if you can see in this photo, but some of those stems do have nests in them. They have little holes in the end, and that's where the bees have chewed their way in. Now, raspberry canes make especially good small carpenter bee habitat. So when I cut mine back in late winter, I'll leave them about 15 inches long or so. And then I'll use the trimmings too. I'll cut those into sections and I'll just put them all over the garden. Some of them I'll just stick right into the ground. And you have to be sure that the stem is dead before you do that. Otherwise, they might just root into the ground and you'll have raspberries everywhere. Others I'll stick into the fence. I have this chain link fence on one side of the garden, which is kind of ugly, but it serves as pretty good habitat as it turns out. So I just stick these stems in the fence either vertically or horizontally. Doesn't matter. You just want to keep them stable somewhere and out of the mud. And then when I see the little bee butts inside, I know that they found them. Now, larger stems like bamboo will provide homes for leafcutter bees. This is a bamboo stake I found in my garden last year that a leafcutter bee made a nest in. So these leafcutter bees will cut circles out of plants and half circles. And in my garden, their two favorite materials to use are rose leaves and Clarkia petals. This is Farewell to Spring. It's a native annual, and they just love these petals. They'll take little pieces, and they'll take those back to their nest, and they'll make their nest cells out of them. And then they'll put a ball of pollen in each cell, and they'll lay a single egg on each pollen ball. And this is a nest that a leafcutter bee made in a mason bee house. You can see she used leaves and petals in her nest. So these mason bee houses will also attract mason bees, of course, and you can put up a house for mason bees. However, you should know that these houses do need maintenance. You really should clean the house and the cocoons every year and store the cocoons in the fridge. Otherwise, you're probably going to have lots of pests and diseases building up inside there. So if you want to do the work, that's great. Put up one of these mason bee houses. But if not, another thing you can do to provide nesting habitat for mason bees and many other insects is to, number 7, provide some dead wood. Dead wood is fantastic habitat for insects. Now, if you happen to have a tree die in your yard, I encourage you to have it cut back to a safe height and just leave it. This is a fabulous dead tree in the garden of another friend of mine. And you can see how the beetles have made holes in the trunk. And when the beetles move out, then the mason bees and other insects can move in. They'll use those tunnels as their nests. You can also drill holes yourself to help speed up the process. Now, if you don't happen to have a dead tree in your garden, another thing you can do is, you can do what I did. I made a stumpery. So I got some free logs off Craigslist. I buried the ends in the ground. I filled the center with soil and I just threw in some plants I had on hand. It filled in quickly. I think it turned out pretty good. So, who has shown up at my stumpery? Well, one day I found a pair of these banded alder borers. These are beetles that lay their eggs in dead or dying trees, and the larvae eat the decaying wood. Now, these are pretty big insects, and they're just striking, just beautiful. They're harmless towards people. Another day, I found this adorable stag beetle near my stumpery. Now, this is a male, and we know that because he's got a little horn. It looks like a miniature rhinoceros. The females don't have that. The females also lay their eggs on dead trees, and the larvae eat the decaying wood. Now, my neighbors had a birch tree cut down, and they gave me a few of the logs, and I put them in my garden. And one day I had a visitor to those logs. It was a solitary wasp, another one in that square-headed wasp family. So these mothers will burrow into soft wood to make their nests, and then they hunt flies to feed their offspring. They stuff them in there and they lay their eggs on them. Now, I never did get a good photo of this wasp, but I have also seen this wasp at Garden Fever, where I work. And pro tip, you can put insects in the fridge for a little while to calm them down and get a better photo. Now, another neighbor of mine put some old logs out by the curb, and I snagged a few of those. By the way, I don't know who these people are who are just giving away perfectly good rotting logs, but I'll take them. One visitor I see to those logs fairly often is this teeny tiny little wasp. It's also a square-headed wasp. And the mothers also nest in soft wood, and they hunt little flies to feed their offspring. Now, this isn't a spectacular insect or anything. It's tiny and it's not very brightly colored, but I just include it because it's just another little creature that exists in my garden that I would never know about if I hadn't provided some habitat and I hadn't paid attention. Another visitor to those logs was this bee fly in the genus Anthrax. Now, you've probably heard of the scary bacteria named anthrax. Well, this is a harmless fly. It's unrelated, but it just also happens to be named anthrax. And the mothers lay their eggs near the nests of other insects. And that's what it looked like she was doing. She was laying eggs. So the lesson here is deadwood is full of life. So number 8 is the one single addition to any garden that will make the biggest difference in encouraging wildlife. So that's according to Dave Goulson. He's an English bumblebee researcher. So what is Dave talking about here? It's a pond. So I took Dave's advice. In late August of 2021, I dug a hole in my backyard. It was 6 feet long, 4.5 feet wide, and 2 feet deep at the deepest point. I put in a pond liner and I filled it with water. I trimmed off the excess liner and I buried the edges. And then I covered up the edges with rocks and logs. And I put in some water plants. I put in a water lily, some native rushes and sedges, some western milfoil. Later, some duckweed came in on its own. Here's what the area looked like when we first moved in around 10 years ago. And here's what it looked like a couple of years ago with the pond and my schooler willow and some other plants and a new fence. Now, I didn't put any fish in my pond because I was hopeful this would become a dragonfly pond, and fish eat baby dragonflies. I was not disappointed. So the following summer, I saw this pair of cardinal meadowhawk dragonflies mating by the pond. Now, when dragonflies mate, they do it in this strange position. It's called a mating wheel. So the male is the red one, and the female's more of a rusty orange color. You can see the male is grabbing the female by the head with the pincers on his abdomen. Now, when she's ready to lay her eggs, he doesn't let go because he doesn't want any other males to mate with her. So he drags her around by the head and he dips her tail end into the water over and over again so she can deposit her eggs or their eggs. Now, later that day, I saw the couple at the pond again, and they were flying around the perching stick that I'd put in the pond specifically for the territorial dragonflies. But then I realized these weren't the cardinal meadowhawks. These were flame skimmers. So flame skimmers are larger than meadowhawks, and the males aren't red, they're more of an orange color. So I was excited to have two species mate and lay eggs in the pond on the same day, but they never got down to business. And then it dawned on me, this wasn't a male and a female. These were two males. So the cardinal meadowhawk baby daddy was fighting with a male flame skimmer who had invaded his territory. In the end, the meadowhawk won. He got his stick back. And I'd always thought that male insects were deadbeat dads, but here was one who proved me wrong. He stood guard over his babies long after the mother had left. And in fact, for almost 3 more weeks, he came back every day and he would sit on that stick for hours. Now, a few weeks after the eggs were laid, I started to find these in the pond. This is a baby dragonfly. It's a dragonfly nymph. So these nymphs live off of small creatures in the pond, especially mosquitoes. Now, every time I show my pond to somebody new, they always say, "But doesn't it attract mosquitoes?" And I say, yes, thankfully it does, because mosquitoes are prime food for dragonflies. And the dragonflies do a very, very good job of keeping them under control. You do not need fish, you just need dragonflies. So the nymphs hung out in my pond eating mosquitoes all summer, fall, winter, and well into spring. And then in late May, I started finding these on my pond plants. This is an exuvia. It's the shed exoskeleton of a dragonfly nymph. So when a dragonfly is ready to emerge, it crawls out of the water and it splits its skin, and the adult dragonfly crawls out. So I wondered if I would ever get to see this happen in person. And then a couple of days later, I did. And it was freaky as hell. So first its head popped out, and then it did a back bend, and it just stayed in that position for quite a while. Eventually, it crawled all the way out, and it just kind of hunkered down on top of its shed skin. And then it started to pump fluid through its body, the insect equivalent of blood, to inflate itself up to size. And it was really pale when it first emerged, and then very, very gradually, the colors began to appear. I just think it's so wild that I get to see this stuff happen right in my backyard. In September, a new character appeared on the scene, a shadow darner. So this was a large dragonfly. She roared in like a helicopter. She started laying eggs on the logs overhanging my pond. I wondered if any of her eggs would end up in the pond where they need to be. But then the following summer, I did find some of her nymphs in the pond. So I guess they made it. Now, I never did get to see any adult shadow darners emerge because this species does it at night. But a few eventually did come out, and they were waiting for me to free them in the morning. So let me explain. After battling the raccoons many, many times, I realized that I really have to put a net over my pond every night if I don't want the raccoons to just come in the night and trash it. They'll tip over plants and push rocks into the pond, even if you don't have fish. And yes, it is a hassle, but I think it is totally worth it if it means I can protect these spectacular creatures. And I have gotten to know so many spectacular creatures in my garden thanks to these practices. Growing keystone plants for the caterpillars, leaving the aphids, providing really good pollen plants, providing really good nectar plants, leaving some bare ground, providing cut stems, providing deadwood, and putting in a pond. These practices have greatly increased biodiversity in my garden, and they've helped connect me to nature in ways that I never imagined. I never know what I'm going to see when I go out to the garden. It's like a safari in my own backyard every day. And now I can't imagine gardening any other way. Thank you.
Hi, Amy. That was really wonderful. The pictures are beautiful. And I think what your main message to me was that you kind of have things in balance. I mean, you let aphids in, but you have insects that come and predate on the aphids. And you not only solved a problem, if there was one, but you've done it in a natural way and you benefit from seeing all these wonderful insects that you have in your garden. We have a number of questions about that very thing. So I love that you just dug a pond in your garden because I think so many people are off put thinking, okay, I need to know what to do here. I probably need to hire a service to come in and do this pond for me. So you simply chose a spot in your garden which you thought was appropriate and then dug your pond and put a liner in. How long did it take before you felt like it was viable and settling in and became a part of your ecosystem in your garden? It take a
While I was digging the pond, um, I guess after I had put water in the pond and I didn't even have any plants in it yet. I had another shadow darner come by and try to lay eggs. And I didn't
Oh,
realize what she was doing because she wasn't laying eggs in the pond. It was around the pond. And I guess that's just what that species does. So it's pretty quick.
and
It
me
doesn't
almost
take,
immediate, really. I
yeah,
mean, that's amazing.
it doesn't take long at all. They will find it.
It's a very good message to all of us to just take the leap and do it. I like the way you finished the sides of your pond. It looked really very natural and normal, and lots of compliments on your wonderful photography. Any photo tips, and can you share the kind of camera you're using on with your photos?
Sure, I have a Canon Rebel T7. It's a pretty simple camera, really. I mean, you could even take really good photos with your phone. I don't like to do that because I like to have a viewfinder. It's really hard to see a screen when it's a sunny day, and it's usually a sunny day when I'm taking these photos. I didn't use a macro lens or a telephoto lens or flash or tripod for any of these. It's just handheld, natural light. Um, I'm just really patient and I take a lot of photos, take a lot of bad photos and blow them up, crop them down. I'll maybe sharpen the focus a little bit, but yeah, that's it.
Just practice. I'm guessing practice, practice, practice
Yeah,
too.
you have to know how to approach the insects. If I see something, I'll look in the distance for movement and then I'll see an insect land and I'll take a photo right then, just so I have something, and then gradually get closer and closer, just taking photos as I get closer and closer in case I scare it off. Um, yeah, just try not to let the sun cast a shadow on the insect because that'll scare them. They're very, I mean, different species have more tolerance than others.
Excellent. I think you just need to
You just need
and
to do it.
being a calm presence. Yeah. The more you do it, probably the calmer your presence
No
becomes.
sudden movements.
Right. You knew you were going to get the mosquito question on the pond. I anticipated that, and that I thought it was so great that you said, "Well, I did that on purpose. Thank goodness they came." Have you ever thought about aerating your pond? If someone had a pond and they did have an aerator or a little waterfall, will that significantly discourage insect activity?
I'm not sure about that. I mean, I know dragonflies really like still water. Um, I
That
don't
is
know if
true,
that
they
would
do.
interfere with them. I mean, certainly if they got caught in the mechanism of it, that could
That
be
would be
bad. But
problematic. Okay.
yeah, I mean, even like a little solar powered fountain might be nice.
It just
Just
keeps a little movement going in the water.
yeah. And
I
I
know
do
that would
have to
make a
top off. I do have to top off the pond every couple of days or so. in the summer because we don't get any rain here.
Right. Right.
But it doesn't take long at all because it's such a small pond.
Okay. Okay, that's good. I liked your tree selection. It was really very informative. And I know you picked a native aspen, and then the raccoon had his way with it, so you replaced it with an alder. Did you find that the aspen created any problems with suckering in your yard during the time you had it? You may not have had it long enough to know.
I didn't have it long enough to know that, but after it got destroyed and I took it out, I was kind of happy that that happened because I think that would happen. I think it would
I kind of did
want to
that
sucker.
experiment, and yeah, because as by nature they grow in a grove, so that's kind of the nature of the tree.
Yeah.
They like to form a grove. So I think alder was a great choice
And
on your part.
my choke cherry has started to sucker.
As a
But you just prune them off. It's like
plants do what
we're
they do.
gardeners. We garden. That's part of gardening, so I don't mind that.
Um, that brings me to trees and shade. I know many of the pollinator and nectar plants that you have in your garden like 6 to 8 hours of sunlight. And if you introduce tips for how best to introduce trees so that you don't lose that sunlight, critical for those perennial pollinator plants. Do
Yeah,
you put them?
when we moved in, it was a blank slate. My garden is very hot, very dry, and so I originally wanted to grow a lot of vegetables along with ornamentals. So wanted to be very careful about trees and not ending up with just a shade garden in a few years. So I didn't plant very many. Um, I really didn't start planting trees in earnest until a few years ago when I started gardening for insects. And I mean, my garden will get shadier over time. That's
Uh-huh.
just, you can't avoid that. I need to be strategic about where you plant them,
Okay.
as far as, where the sun is in the sky and what it's going to shade. But I mean, it's a trade-off.
That's a balance.
Yeah.
Right. I get that. Thanks. That's a great answer. What variety of manzanita do you have in your yard? You
I
mentioned you had a big.
have Austin Griffiths, which I just found out yesterday is half dead. After that
Oh,
bad winter, it really did a number
the wet.
on
So
a
much wet.
couple of them. Yeah, it killed my Lewis Edmonds, which was just gorgeous.
Oh,
So I replaced that with a baby Lewis Edmonds. I have one called Diablo's Blush, which is fantastic. It's a dwarf one.
okay.
I have a little Saint Helena that I just planted last year, and some little ground covers, and
Okay.
love them.
Okay. Those are good
Great
tips.
plants.
Yeah. I love the blossoming on them. I think they're stunning. We did have a participant that would like some recommendations for large shrubs that are beneficial to caterpillars, birds, and bees. That they tend to have to plant parking strip things, so they can't put trees in for the height because they're right under power lines usually. So the best choice of shrubs that you think would fit that bill: caterpillars, birds, and bees.
Um, I would say, well, first I would go to the National Wildlife Federation's Native Plant
Site.
Finder website.
And that's on your
Enter your
resource
zip
list.
code. Yeah, enter your zip code, and then that'll give you caterpillar plants. Um, and that's very helpful. I don't know, off the top of my head, I would say ocean spray is
Okay.
great. Um, the cherries we have, the bitter cherry and the choke cherry, tend to sucker, but they can also be trees. So
And maybe too high for the power
they might
line.
get too big.
What about
Nine bark.
ceanothus?
Nine
Okay.
bark would be good.
Okay.
We have a native nine bark. Ceanothus, California lilac.
You think spirea?
Um, yes, they would need a fair amount of water, but spireas. Um,
Yeah, sometimes in a health strip, getting water there is a problem. So that's a
flowering
good point.
currant.
And they would have height. That's nice to have height. Okay, good ideas. And I think recommending that list is how to go to the site and put your zip code in is a good suggestion. You did recommend a number of European perennial varieties. Have you found any of them to be invasive in any way? Too much of one thing?
Um, I don't think so. Not the ones I've used.
Okay.
Um,
So the ones in your presentation do not pose an invasive problem to gardeners.
no, the astrantia will reseed.
It
Uh,
self-sows. Mhm.
yeah, yeah, not obnoxiously. Um, the shrubby hare's ear has never reseeded. Um,
Okay. Well, good. That's good. All good news. Let's go to your stumpery, which fascinated a couple of different people. One person wanted to know, what plants did you find worked the best around your stumpery?
well, the stumpery is in the very corner of the garden that almost never gets water. So they've just got to be really tough plants.
Tough.
They're not necessarily the best pollinator plants. They'll survive there. But a friend did give me a European geranium. I believe it's geranium macrorhizum that I have planted in the middle there in the soil, and it has done just a fantastic job. And the bumblebees do visit it, I think just for nectar, but they do visit it and it blooms for a long time. Um, I also have some epimediums there, which,
Yeah, they like dry. Yeah, they like
yeah,
dry.
they live, they don't feed anybody, but they
Okay.
cover the ground. I've got some sword ferns, wild ginger, our native ginger, does great in dry shade.
Excellent.
Mhm.
Thank you. The other question was, they noticed you put them for vertically and then does it make any difference vertically or horizontally, the significance of putting dead wood around, or is it just your taste and your garden design?
I don't think it matters. Um, as just my preference, and I guess it's more natural. It's what an insect would encounter in the woods is a dead standing tree. So it's kind of trying to mimic that, but
But
they'll
if it's
use
down there, also down a lot of down timber in the
they'll
forest too.
use
So,
downed logs too. Yeah.
um, a gentleman just sent in a question about willows. Concerned about an urban lot in which a willow will interfere with various utilities in an urban lot. The willow variety that you recommend, the Schooler's willow, is it less apt to be a problem with its roots getting into your sewer line or your water line?
Um, I mean, I'm sure it has a pretty extensive root system. So yeah, if you're concerned about that, I would maybe not choose a willow.
Yeah, be
Yeah, I
aware.
don't.
Be aware of where utilities are located.
Yeah, yeah.
I wanted to make sure I get, oh, okay, there was one gal who wanted to know if you know that you have ground nesting bees in your yard, is it okay to do any digging in April, or should you wait till May or later? What's your best advice? If you know there are ground nesting bees there, should you just never dig? Should they do?
Well, you don't need to feel like you're walking on eggshells in your own garden. But on the other hand, once you really take a look at what's going on, you'll realize there are insects living everywhere all year round in the soil and everywhere. So, yeah, just try to disturb the ground as little as possible. I don't know that there's any best time to do that. I mean, if you know specifically you have mining bees that nest in the spring, maybe just do your digging in the fall when they're not active. I
when
mean,
they're not
the
active.
babies will still be in there, but hopefully they'll be far enough down that they won't be bothered. And then when they go to emerge, they don't necessarily go up the same opening that the mother made. They'll just they'll just dig straight up. So,
From wherever they are. Okay.
yeah, don't be worried about destroying their nest entrance um,
They're
once
adaptable.
once it's been
Mhm.
made, because yeah, they should be able to find their way out.
Well, adaptation is the name of the game here. They are. Insects can do amazing things. I know I don't have mason bee houses around my home, but I have mason bees that find opportunistic places in which to find a little home. So insects are amazing creatures, and you've certainly given us 8 strategies for inviting them into our yard. We very much appreciate it. If by chance we didn't answer your question, please send it to 10minuteu2017@gmail.com and we'll see that you get an answer to your question. And Amy, I can't thank you enough. Thanks for making this such a great ending to our series of webinars.
Thank you for having me.